community with information sharing and also ensuring that everyone knows what is happening in our nation and in our state and in our community. Thus, we have the following individuals who are going to be sharing with us this evening. First, we have Senator Chris Van Hollen, elected to the U.S. Senate by the people of Maryland in November of 2016. He is committed to fighting every day to ensure that our state and our country live up to their full promise of equal rights, equal justice, and equal opportunity. In 2002, he was elected to represent Maryland's 8th Congressional District in the House of Representatives. He served as a member of the Democratic leadership and was elected by his colleagues in the House to be the ranking member of the House Budget Committee and protect vital interests like Social Security and Medicare. A tireless fighter for the people of Maryland, he has also become known for working hard to find common sense solutions to difficult national issues. So thank you for being with us, Senator Van Hollen.
Well, oh, you're going to introduce everybody, right?
So I'm going to introduce everyone. Yes.
Okay.
And then I'm going to come right back to you.
Perfect.
Great. Thank you. Next, we have Councilman Julian Jones. He is a community leader, former PTA president of Hernwood Elementary School. He was a member of the Caucus of African American Leaders and a 2-term member of the Baltimore County Democratic Central Committee. He was elected to County Council in 2014. So we are so delighted to have you with us this evening, Councilman Jones. Erma Barron was the 27th Regional Director of the notable North Atlantic region of Alpha Kappa Alpha Sorority Incorporated. A former mathematical statistician for the federal government, she is a member of the Prince George's County chapter of AKA, and she also holds the role of the North Atlantic Regional Representative to the International Connections Committee. So welcome, Erma Barron. Next, we have Tiffany Loftin. She serves as the National Director for the Youth and College Division at the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People. Her mission is to train and to organize and uplift young Black leaders everywhere who fight for the racial, social, and economic equity of all people. There are over 340 middle, high school, and college autonomous chapters under her leadership who constantly recruit new members and organize local and national campaigns like ending mass incarceration, ending gun violence, school safety, and college affordability. Welcome, Tiffany.
Thank you.
And we also have Janis Washington. She is a civil rights leader who currently serves as the Maryland State Coordinator for the AKA Connection Committee for the notable North Atlantic region. A former educator, she is a staunch advocate in the community and is known to be leading voter registration efforts wherever you see her. So those are our speakers for this evening. So let's hear first from Senator Van Hollen.
Well, thank you. It is great to be with all the AKAs, and I want to thank you, Kendra Brown, for organizing this and your chapters taking the lead in bringing together AKAs from around the state at this really important time in our national history. I also want to thank you for your previous service on Capitol Hill as the Chief of Staff to my good friend, the Congressman G.K. Butterfield. And it's a privilege to join with everybody, with the ladies in salmon pink and apple green. And I want you to know that when I was in the House of Representatives, we had a great majority of we had a lot of AKAs, let's put it this way. But at that time, no deltas. Now that I'm in the Senate, I will say that we have some deltas as well. But on this call, we have my legislative counsel, Dena Gibbs, who's a proud soror. So I wanted just to give her a shout out as well. And I know we're going to be hearing from other guests later in the program. I want to thank them. A special shout out to my friend, Council Member Julian Jones. I don't know if he's joined us yet, but we work very closely together in partnership on issues related to Baltimore County. Originally, when we first scheduled this, we were going to focus on all the different aspects of COVID-19, the health impact, as well as the economic fallout and pain. And I am going to make remarks about how we respond to that. But first, I want to address the other vital issue of national importance to our country. And that is really finally coming to grips with the issue of systemic racism, which of course we saw in one of its ugliest forms with the murder of George Floyd. And we also, of course, saw the killing of Breonna Taylor and so many other Black Americans who have suffered because of police brutality and other systems of ingrained racism. And so this is a moment that our country has to deal with. And we really do demand positive change. I was proud to both stand and kneel with protesters outside the United States Capitol demanding change. And now we need to make sure that we bring that change inside the Capitol. And I spoke on the Senate floor today with a number of my colleagues and pointed out that even since the murder of George Floyd, we've seen other deaths at the hands of the police, including Rayshard Brooks in Atlanta. And anyone who's seen that terrible video has to conclude that this is something that never had to happen or should happen. And 2 bullets in the back, it is something that is shocking to the conscience and requires change. And so this is why I was proud to join with both in the Senate with Senator Booker and Senator Harris, but also with members of the Congressional Black Caucus in introducing the Justice and Policing Act, which takes a number of bills that many of us had worked on previously, puts them together in an important and comprehensive package, includes other additional reforms, and I'm happy to go into the specifics. But the idea is to make sure that we have accountability and transparency in policing, that we have real consequences for police misconduct, that we outright ban abusive practices like chokeholds, and that we eliminate the doctrine of qualified immunity, which is interpreted by the Supreme Court, has essentially provided a shield to state actors, including police officers, when they grossly violate people's human rights and deprive them of their liberty and their life. And it is important that that be part of the package, and it is. So we're gonna fight very hard to pass this. We're pushing Leader McConnell, the Republican leader in the Senate, to bring this up before the July break when Congress goes out. Speaker Pelosi in the House is also committed to bringing that Justice and Policing bill up for a vote in the House of Representatives before July. So I hope this is a moment for real action on police accountability. But I also hope it's a moment where we launch a number of other essential changes dealing with systemic racism, which is not confined to the institution of policing, but that we see in so many other parts of our society. The criminal justice system, where while we represent 5% of the world's population, we have 20% of the world's prison population, disproportionately people of color and Black Americans. It's a disgrace that we've locked so many people up in this country because of discriminatory laws and application of laws. We need to get rid of private prisons. Nobody should have a profit motive for locking people up. And we need to make many other changes there as well. But beyond that, we see these gross inequities in many of our other systems. And that brings me to COVID-19, which is exposed and shown, not exposed, shown a very harsh light on inequities that many of us have been working with before the pandemic, but which the glare and harsh light of the pandemic have shown that we need to tackle in an even more urgent manner, beginning with the huge disparate impact in terms of deaths, mortality from COVID-19. But of course, that also extends to other parts of the healthcare system in measures like maternal mortality rates and other areas where we have to make these substantial changes, whether it's inequitable educational opportunities, economic opportunities, the gap in income and wealth, which is just huge and has not gotten better in this country for a very, very long time. So this is a moment of reckoning, and it's essential that we all work together to make real change. Now, if I could just briefly mention with respect to COVID-19, in terms of addressing the healthcare impacts, we need to continue to provide resources to the healthcare workers on the front lines, the nurses, the doctors, hospitals, importantly, community health centers. And we need to make sure the resources go to communities that have been hit the hardest, which is why early on, I organized a letter from the Maryland congressional delegation to Governor Hogan, asking that the governor collect this data in the state of Maryland on a demographic basis and by zip code, so that we could understand clearly the impact it was having. And it revealed what we had heard, which is that Black Americans and communities of color have been especially hard hit by this pandemic. And so we then organized another letter from the delegation to the governor saying, look, it's important to collect this information, but the purpose in collecting it is to now direct the help and resources to those communities that have been hardest hit. And that includes making sure that the hardest hit communities have the personal protective equipment, but also testing. And as we work to reopen and try to reopen safely, comprehensive and easily available testing is an essential part of that. And so we've urged the governor to use over $200 million in federal funding to develop a plan to make sure that that testing is focused on communities that have been hardest hit by COVID-19. And the same holds true with our efforts with respect to the economic fallout. The Congress has passed 4 bills now on a bipartisan basis. Even in these polarized times, we were able to come together to do that. The biggest one was the CARES Act, and it has a number of important provisions, including dramatically expanding eligibility for unemployment insurance. So for those who've lost their jobs or income through no fault of their own, and that increase of $600 per week for people who have lost work because of COVID-19. That expires at the end of July. But at the end of July, millions of Americans will still be out of work. And so we need to extend those important protections. In Maryland, we've been very frustrated that the State Department of Labor has been very slow to process a lot of those UI benefits. We continue to be after them to do that. In addition, there were the small business provisions, and we've worked over 3 rounds to really try and focus that relief again where it's needed most on truly small businesses. We've tried to provide, we did provide a down payment for state and local governments because we need to avoid layoffs in our frontline workers. We need to extend the food assistance programs, which are so very important. And we need to address the issues of the digital divide and the homework gap issues that I've been working on before the pandemic hit, but again, have exposed the inequities in our education system, including when it comes to distance learning and the digital divide. So this pandemic, we need to address it in its healthcare dimension. We need to address it in its economic dimension. And the measures that have been taken have certainly helped. It's not been perfect, but they've helped. But it's very important that we now take up the next major bill and pass it. And again, today in the Senate, we called upon Mitch McConnell, the Republican leader, to also take up and pass an extension of the CARES Act before the 4th of July break. The House has passed the HEROES Act. They passed it weeks ago. It has a lot of very important protections, including the ones I mentioned, plus for rental assistance. And we need to take that up and get it passed. So let me end there. And again, I look forward to any questions that you may have and comments. And I really appreciate the opportunity to get together with the AKAs. It's always good to see the AKAs in person. I look forward to the time when we can do that again. But for now, it's great to have the chance to join with everybody virtually. So thank you very much, Kendra. I'll turn it back over to you.
Great, thank you, Senator Van Hollen. We sincerely appreciate your comprehensive overview. And we look forward to seeing you in person as well. So I am actually going to now yield to Tiffany. I know that she has another event that she has to speak for this evening. We would love to hear from you, Tiffany, and then we'll hear from Councilman Jones.
Thank you so much, Kendra. I appreciate you, sis. Hi, everyone. Good evening. I hope that you all are somewhere safe where you feel supported and loved this evening. I think if I'm still counting, I'm pretty close to day 97 for my lockdown here in Washington, D.C. So wherever you're tuning in from, I appreciate you. A little bit of an echo. Is that just me?
I do hear a little bit of an echo from you. Does everyone else hear that? Okay, let's try it again. Okay.
Hi, testing, 1, 2, 3.
I think everyone needs to mute their mic except for Tiffany.
That is still echoing. Everybody's on mute. Let me try my earbuds.
Okay.
Let's see if that works. This is the beauty of technology when we are socially distant. Okay, let's see if that works. How's that? Is that better?
It is, yes.
Okay, if I start hearing it again on my end, then I know it wasn't. Okay, there we go. Okay, I don't know why headphones made it work better, but that's good. So good evening. I hope that everybody's doing well. I know that there's a lot going on, and I'm on day 97, 98, who's counting now, of a lockdown here in Washington, D.C. So wherever you're tuning in from, I hope that your spirit feels good. I'm not going to be before you long because I just want to make sure I get to answer some questions today. But I want to talk to you all about 3 quick things. The first is, in the midst of what is happening across the country, I just want to name and point out the incredible strength, resiliency, and courage of Generation Z and all of our young people right now, who are not just taking to the streets, but who are organizing on social media, the folks who are reaching out to their elected officials, the folks who are demanding for change in real ways, and pushing and forcing people to imagine the America that we've always dreamed of. I'm so incredibly encouraged every single morning I wake up because I'm watching the young folks lead that national conversation and have a strategy along with the goals that they want to see. Those young folks are you all. Those young folks are folks that live in your household. Those young folks are the folks who live in your neighborhood. They're the folks who go to school with you. They're folks that you are connected with online. And we would not be seeing the sweeping change and the incredible shift in conversation and policy if it weren't for those young folks who are leading. Naming that though, I want to make sure that the folks who are outside and the folks who are online, who are being polarized and drawn to this moment around Black Lives Matter, around COVID-19, around education affordability and access, that you don't just think that being outside is the check mark to activism and social justice. This is a marathon. I'm I just turned 31 years old in April during the COVID-19 crisis. And I can tell you that when I was 19, 20 years old, I was doing the exact same thing. I know that my elders were doing the exact same thing when they were our age. So it is oftentimes said as a cliche, but this is a marathon, not a sprint. So what I'm asking folks to do in terms of my first point is to make sure that people are recruiting themselves to find political homes. The AKAs is a political home. The campus that you're at, the school that you're at is a political home. Your Black Student Union is a political home. Your student government and SGA is a political home. The NAACP is a political home. I don't care what it looks like or where it is. Just make sure that it is a group of community members that you identify with that are fighting for an agenda like yours and somewhere that you feel safe and encouraged to be the best leader that you can be. So the first thing is, don't just get caught up in outside, make sure you find a political home. The second thing is really important that folks may or may not recognize, because I know that being remote and virtual makes us feel like we only have so many options to get involved. But let me remind you what those options are so that we're not just tweeting and on Instagram and Facebook changing our avatar. We need artists. There are artists like Nicholas Smith who is organizing every single time he sees a positive picture that paints peaceful protesters. He is the one who is drawing and creating that image. We have poets, we have singers who are showing up in new ways to help document what the feeling of outside feels like and what the feeling of this protest and movement of Black Lives Matter feels like. So we need artists. We also need agitators. I am convinced, and nobody can tell me differently, that we would not be having these national conversations, that the police chief in Minneapolis would not have fired those police officers who murdered George Floyd in the same day, if it had not been for the agitators. Agitators are a good thing. Agitators make sure that the work gets done. Agitators are the ones who push the conversation to make sure that honesty and truth are values that we stay grounded in. So we need agitators. But in addition to the agitators, we also need folks who are strategists. The strategists are the folks who are helping to understand and create the policies that are going to institutionalize our change. The strategists are the folks who are saying, maybe we're not going to use this tactic to march and protest and take over the freeway. Maybe instead we're going to send a bunch of tweets to our elected official. That's the strategist. We need more strategists. We need strategists who are going to say, this is the ultimate goal that we want to have. How are we going to reach it? And then we need organizers. I'm an organizer. You can be all of these things, but I like to classify myself as an organizer. My job is to make sure that the folks who are out in the streets protesting not just find political homes, that we don't just train folks to be strategists, but that we are helping to foster and grow and strengthen new leadership in our communities so that we are able to make the best choices and decisions on behalf of ourselves. I work as the national director at the Youth and College Division. My actual job is to train new leaders everywhere across the country every single day. Your political home can do that. The AKAs, they're doing that for you. And so the responsibility of organizers is necessary because we're the ones who find the folks on the ground and in the field to recruit them into this work. So that's the second thing. Make sure you find a political home and make sure that you identify with a certain role because there's room and space for everyone. And the last one is simple, but I have to say it again because I am arguing with people on social media about it. And I'm having a class that I have to jump off this call to get on the next call to talk about. And that's simple. Voting is necessary, but it's not sufficient. Voting is necessary, but it's not sufficient. That being said, I need everyone to vote. November 3rd is coming up, and I got into a conversation with someone on social media who told me to shut up and stop talking about voting because it wasn't going to solve all of our problems for Black people. And I never said voting was going to solve all of our problems. Again, it's necessary, but it's not sufficient. My problem with the comment from the person online who told me to shut up and stop talking about voting because they thought that that was a silly response was when I asked them why they thought that was not a good idea or a good strategy for us to use, they told me because voting on November 5th doesn't solve everything. The general election is November 3rd, not November 5th. So if we're going to have the conversation about voting and we may or may not agree on the same tactic, I need you to at least understand the system, and I need you to understand the date. General elections are not on November 5th. They are November 3rd. We are talking about a long-term systemic issue that is not just going to be solved when the protests happen, because I guarantee you, and I'm sure my colleagues can agree with me, that the protests and the uprisings, they will quiet down. They will not end, but they will quiet down eventually. And so when they do, our responsibility and our role is to make sure that we are exercising every single one of our strengths as leaders in our communities, every single one of our strengths as activists and organizers in our political homes, and every single one of our strengths as influencers with the people that we love and are closest to. So make sure that you remember that voting is a part of that toolbox, not the entire strategy to win. I'm very, very excited and glad to be here. I appreciate you all for the space. My job is to make sure that young people across the country feel supported and have the tools and the information that they need to be successful. And being able and welcomed back to this space just reminds me how important the work is, but just how incredible Black women are. So thank you all so much for your time.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Tiffany. I sincerely appreciate your thoughts and your views and the work that you are doing. Thank you. Okay, Councilman Jones.
Thank you so very, very much for having me. I certainly appreciate it. I also would like to take a minute to just thank the AKAs for putting on this very important forum. You have a terrific panelist. I'd like to thank the Senator Van Hollen, who's been a champion for so many years throughout his political career. I'm proud of all the work he's doing and the attention that he's been continuing to give to our community. Tiffany, I certainly appreciate your words. They certainly were true, and I don't want to spend a lot of time going back over what has been said already. So what I'm going to do is talk a little bit about the coronavirus. And then I'll go into the other things. I mean, in Maryland right now, I think we have somewhere in the neighborhood of 62,000 cases that are positive cases. They tested 366,000 people, and they came up with somewhere, those were the ones that were negative. So right now there's 742 people that are hospitalized. And if you look at Baltimore County, that number, of course, is much smaller. In Baltimore County, we have conducted 76,000 tests, and we had 406 people die from the coronavirus. Now, the numbers are way down. The thing that I would say to everybody is protect yourself at all times, because unfortunately, the politics of the White House have sort of infected certain things. So it makes it very difficult for people to disseminate what's good information and bad information. But as long as you do your very best in terms of social distancing, I'm reminded social distancing and take the precautions that are necessary to protect yourself, you should be okay. We certainly hope. I was reminded of a gentleman told me that he opened up the church and because he could, and that he was expecting half the people to come back, and he didn't get half the people because the people were still taking precautions, looking out for their own safety. So I will leave it there. And now, as far as economic goes, in Baltimore County, of course, everybody knows about the Paycheck Protection Program, and we certainly thank you, Senator Van Hollen, for all of that federal dollars that's been flowing in. We've been trying to maximize that in Baltimore County in terms of things we've been doing with the money, in terms of feeding people. We continue to feed an awful lot of people on Saturdays. We feed school children Monday through Thursdays throughout the county. And we've had grants for businesses. We've had grants for artists. We just kicked off a program to give people a grant for rental assistance if they've been affected by COVID. So there's an awful lot of help out there. We're happy to see that we know that there was tremendous problems with the state in terms of unemployment, getting the funds to people. But the good thing was whenever a person gets their funding, it will be backdated to when they applied or when they first were affected by the COVID. So we are very grateful for all the assistance that's been flowing out there. It's really been a lifeline to a lot of people. I'm sitting here in Randallstown and I'm looking at many of the restaurants closing forever. I'm looking at some of the other businesses that are sort of holding on by a thread. And so we certainly hope that we can get out of this in as best shape as we can. As it relates to, and I'll look forward to the questions there, but now I'll move on to some of the other issues. Of course, I, like so many people in the world, looked at, utter disgust at what we saw, what happened with Mr. Floyd. I mean, it's hard to believe that a occupation or people could be that cruel that they could participate in something like that we saw. I mean, I could not stand idly by and watch you harm an animal like that. I could not do it. But for some reason, these officers were perfectly okay with watching another officer choke someone to death. And despite all the crowds yelling, despite the cell phone cameras flashing, and they had to know they were alive, and they did it anyway. And it says something about that culture. It says something about the culture that you would do this with everyone in the world watching. You would still do it. So I don't know if it means that you're so used to doing it that it's nothing new and you can't help yourself, or is it that you've gotten away with it so much you don't think that any consequence will come from it? But I am proud of our country at this particular moment that people are standing up and demanding change. I'm encouraged. I've gone to quite a few protests. I was very, very proud of my daughter and my granddaughter. They came to me and said, "Hey, we want to do a protest." And I said, "Uh-oh," but then, I'm thinking back in my head, well, what kind of dad am I? So I said, "Hey, look, let's go for it. I'll help you in any way I can." And it was very, very successful. And I've gone to quite a few marches, and I'm just encouraged when I see the group of people that are there. I'm talking about all different ages, all different races, and people are just asking for change and demanding change. And I was in Reisterstown and a gentleman walked up to me. I'll tell you, he was an elderly white guy. He walked up to the kids that I was talking to, and he told them that he apologized because he was naive all his life. He never thought that this sort of thing happened, but now he sees and he wants to make a difference. I talked to a gentleman today that's 80 years old, and he told me, another white guy, and he told me, "Hey, listen, you have to do something because this is out of control. We can't allow that to happen." What happened created a stain, not just on the police department, but it also created a stain on this great nation, because all around the world, people look, and people all around the world is protesting, saying that we have to do better. So that, to me, that's, I'm happy to see that we're making progress. Now, beyond the marching is the legislation to make the progress, right? So I realized that the president put out an executive order today. I haven't had a chance to review it all or read it, but I'm just going to say this. We saw what happened when Obama left and Donald Trump came in. Every executive order that he can get his hands on, he threw out the window. So that's why it's so important that we have legislation that is codified into law, because that takes a little more to undo. So I look forward to all the legislative efforts that'll come out of the Congress. I look forward to what's happening at our state level when they get back into session. And I welcome the county executive, Janis Washington, put out an executive order announcing some policy changes that he's going to do here at the local level. And let me see, I can share some of those things with you real fast. Come down here. And then what I'll do, I'll tell you about the legislation that I'm putting forward. And I'm having a press conference this Friday. And a lot of these things will overlap, but they're going to overlap, but it's important that we codify these things in the law. So instead of some of the things that the county executive put forth is he's going to hire a company to look at our hiring process. He's going to change our use of force policies. He's going to do a lot of those things. Now, my legislation that I have been shopping around and basically letting everybody take a look at it, I'm gonna have a press conference this Friday to announce it. Real quickly, number one, it will define and it requires the use of de-escalatory techniques before a police officer can use physical force. A lot of people are getting it mixed up when they hear de-escalation techniques. I've used specific incidents where I've talked to police officers and said, show me where de-escalation took place. One example was they said, well, de-escalation took place when the officer told a gentleman to put his hands on his dash and turn the car off. But at some point, the gentleman said, I'm getting out of the car. This happened in September in Baltimore County. The mother called and said her son was thinking about committing suicide. He left the ice pick in his home. But the police pulled him over driving on 83. They asked him to put his hands on his dash. He was resistant. Eventually he did it. Then he said he was getting out of the car. They told him, don't get out the car. He says, no, I'm getting out of the car. The police officer came around the car to meet him as he opened his car door and shot him 8 times. 4 times in the chest, 4 times in the back as the gentleman was falling to the ground. So I said, where's the de-escalation there? They said, oh, de-escalation has nothing to do with that. So I think we have to really look at what de-escalation is, because in my world, de-escalation meant the officer would have never went around that car to confront him. He would have stayed in a safe place where he could have made a better assessment and took more time to decide whether or not this guy was a threat. The guy had no weapon. So number one, it will require techniques that the officer must do before they use physical force. Number two, it defines and limits the use of physical force by a police officer. We get into all the legalese. It prohibits the use of chokeholds and anything that relates to some type of asphyxiation technique, anything that would cut off air or circulation. Requires a police officer to render first aid in certain circumstances. That goes back to what happened in Baltimore City. Requires police officers to intervene and report when the police officer used unnecessary force. So one of the biggest issues that I think is there, we have a tremendous police officers that work every day trying to do the right thing. And they will tell you that, you know, hey, I'm doing the right thing. I hate these bad police officers that make us all look bad. But the issue is there's a culture where they don't come forward and report other officers or even intervene when other officers are going astray. So we're going to make that a law that that's something that they must do. Not asking them to do it. The law will say that they must do it. And most police officers that I've talked to welcome that because they think maybe that nudge will cause the good officers to sort of stand up.
And Councilman Jones, so
yeah.
I wanted to just ensure that we get to the Q&A. So what we're going to do, we're going to find the link to the information that was shared by the county executive, and we're going to put that into the chat so that everyone has that. And then we can circle back in the Q&A, because I do want to ensure that we do get to the Q&A, and I see that there are some questions that are coming in. So we will hear from Ms. Erma Barron, and then from Janis Washington about the work that AKA is doing. And then we will shift from there to the Q&A section. All right. Thank you so much. Thank you. All right. Let me unmute her. All right, there you go.
Good evening, Kendra, and thank you for having me. And good evening to all of the panelists and all of the attendees. I'm so glad that Tiffany referred to this as a marathon, because Alpha Kappa Alpha has been at this since 1908, and we're still at it. Back then, we chose as our motto, service to all mankind. And that included health, education, housing, discrimination, police brutality, voting rights, all of the things that we are dealing with today. And so Alpha Kappa Alpha can be looked upon not just as a service organization, but as social activists. And that is what we are doing today. You know, given the times, it's not just enough to fight for legislation that affects health and education, but today we find ourselves dealing with the heart of the issues, and that is the racism that is upon us, that has been revealed and shown a very dirty spotlight on. Well, how are we addressing these issues? We're organized. We're organized across the country, and we have what we call our connection committee. Janice is going to talk a little bit about what's going on in the state of Maryland, but we have people like Janice in every state in this country, and we're organized to address some very major issues. The immediate one with dealing with racism, we are going to support, and you will be hearing soon about our call to action regarding the Justice in Policing Act. We're going to get out the vote. It's not just enough to register people to vote, but we've got to make sure that they get out to vote. And we're going to collaborate with other organizations to get that done. The NAACP. We just joined forces with 12 other organizations led by women that cover about 5 million members. And so we're going to work on the issues of dealing with police brutality. We're going to get that legislation passed, and we're going to work to make sure that that happens. We have with some other things that we're doing is we're asking our local chapters to work with other organizations. And one of them is the When We All Vote campaign. And that's heavily weighted towards registering people to vote and then making sure they vote. One of our fun things to do is a couch party where we come together and then we get on our phones and we call everybody. And we're going to tell them to get out and vote. We're going to have forums where they have reasons to vote. We're going to bring the spotlight on those reasons why they need to get out and vote. I have so much that I can talk about the census, and Kendra, you warned me, I can't go on and on with this. And so I'll let Janice talk about some of the things that are being done locally here in Maryland.
Wonderful, thank you so much. All right, let me unmute her. Okay, there you go.
Good evening, everyone. And I also want to thank our leader, Kendra Brown, for having the vision and the foresight and having this community conversation and inviting the prominent leaders that we have with us today. I especially want to thank Senator Chris Van Hollen for his blunt statement and his recognition of systemic racism, and for taking the fight to the Senate floor to get support for police reform. And I want to thank Councilman Julian Jones, my councilman for the 4th District, who's been who's proactive in his efforts to uplift and advance people in this district, and for coming on board with a short notice to join us. And certainly I want to thank Erma Barron, who is our leader in this region and on the international level as well, in guiding us and directing us and giving us a charge to keep in addressing the issues of today. These actions that we are taking is dear to my heart because I've been an activist since I was 13 years old, being an organizer with the NAACP in Dallas, Texas. And it's always been my passion and my interest and be involved in civil rights. And I'm of the baby boomer generation. And we were the young people back then when we were sitting in and demonstrating and marching and boycotting and having to fight racism head on. But I'm so happy that young people today have caught the fire, the Generation X, and they are leading the way now like they did back in the 60s and when we had the sit-ins and the demonstrations. Now in the state of Maryland, we have 19 chapters, graduate chapters, and about 8 undergraduate chapters. And we have organized them to come together to address our top priorities, and that's voter registration, education, and get out the vote. They have a connection committee or a social action committee, and they have organized into squads in connection with when we all vote. And they are doing amazing things across this state to address the issues and to make people aware. With the voting, we of course had to scale back our efforts because we've been always active in having in-person campaigns to reach people, to register, to educate them, and to get them out to vote. So we had to, of course, scale back because of COVID-19, and we've been doing it virtually, reaching out to our personal contacts, as well as informing people through creating infographics and videos to inform people through our social media platforms to register and to vote and to get involved. We had a very fun activity called Party at the Mailbox that was geared toward the Baltimore City elections. And we were able to inspire and have a good time at the same time, and encouraging people to register to vote. Now, we've asked our chapters to focus on their faith and church communities this month, and to get their pastors and priests or bishops to encourage people to register to vote through the virtual services that they've had. And and many of them are doing that. We've also been trying to reach out to the students in Baltimore County. They're not in school, but we've been able to get to them through their counselors, because the counselors sent out a weekly newsletter called S'mores, and they inform them. And so we've asked them to encourage the young people to register to vote. Now, with this When We All Vote campaign, we've been able to get our own custom, the AKA's own custom AKA portal, where people can use their cell phones and use the QR code in order to self-register themselves. So we don't have to have anybody standing there to write up or have them to write up their registration. They can self-register if they would just go into weall.vote/AKA, then it will enable them to register themselves and connect them with their own Board of Elections. And we're going to be focusing on that even more with the Outvote app that we've been given. Not only we will be able to register people that we know, but we're going to be given a listing of people that we don't know and communicate to them and encourage them to get on the books, get registered so they can be prepared to vote. Now today opens up the registration for Baltimore County for the November general election. And that will continue until October 23rd. So if you're not registered, you can get registered and at this time. So not only are they working on voter registration, but they're working on the census, getting their families and their friends to fill out their forms. And we know that we have to work on that even more because of the low numbers. And with the police reform, we've asked our chapters to work with their local NAACP and to examine their local police departments, policing, and make recommendations and fight for better reforms. So we are totally involved, we're active, and we're anxious to see change in this country.
Thank you so much. Sincerely appreciate your overview. And I do see the numerous questions that have come in. Sincerely appreciate everyone who has shared. And I am going to take as many questions as we can. And I know that there are some that I will direct to individual panelists. And I'll just ask if that one panelist, if that one person could respond. So I will start with Senator Van Hollen. There are a number of questions in the chat that have to do with the executive order. And we know that that did come out today. You know, it was issued today. And I'm unmuting you now. And so just, I'm wondering if you have initial thoughts that you can share on, you know, the effectiveness. I know that the Justice and Policing Act has also been introduced. And so if you could just share your feedback on the executive order.
Yes, and I've had a chance to review the summary of the executive order. In fact, I looked through it. There were some things that it turned out were in there on review that were not originally reported. But overall, my assessment is that these are very small steps that are outlined in the executive order, and that we need to take the much stronger and bolder measures that are in the Justice for Policing Act. The executive order does call for more data collection about police misconduct, and that's important. The way it's framed in the Justice for Policing Act is more comprehensive, and the penalties for not complying with it are very clear. With respect to establishing more independent review of police misconduct, again, the Justice for Policing Act has much clearer and stronger mandates in that particular area. When it comes to banning certain abusive practices, the Justice and Policing Act is broader. And then there's some things that are not covered at all in the executive order, even in the relatively weak way that some issues are handled there. So, for example, I mentioned the issue of qualified immunity. You know, the Supreme Court had a chance just yesterday or in the last couple of days to review the doctrine of qualified immunity. They decided not to, but I think that the Senate and the House need to take that up. It's in both. It's in the bills that have been introduced in the House and the Senate, the Justice and Policing Act, to address that issue. And just to summarize that, you know, right now, this is under Section 1983 of the Civil Rights Act. And what it provides for is that if a officer of the state, like a police officer, has illegally deprived somebody of their civil rights, including their right to liberty and life, that you can bring a lawsuit as a way to hold somebody accountable. And the Supreme Court established this doctrine that for the most part holds police officers pretty much totally immune, even for the grossest violations of people's civil rights. And that's not right. And so that's why one of the provisions in the Justice for Policing Act calls for dramatically overhauling that particular doctrine. So overall, the Justice in Policing Act is much more comprehensive. The provisions for ensuring that states and local jurisdictions adopt them are much tougher. And then there are these provisions that are in the Justice for Policing Act that are not covered at all by the executive order.
Thank you, Senator Van Hollen. And I know that time is winding down, but I want to get probably at least 2 more questions in very quickly. So one of the questions has to do with whether there are programs that educate our youth on how state and local government works and how that type of partnership can be used to create a social change within our immediate communities, such as in terms of voting, civics education. And so if any of the panelists want to briefly touch upon that, either Councilman Jones or Senator Van Hollen. So yes, Councilman Jones.
I'll just say that, of course, I met with a group, Sunday, a group of young people who came together. It was a pretty extensive crowd, and they wanted to know those answers to basically what you said. And they wanted to know how they make change beyond the marching. So the information, kids are out there, young people out there asking for this information. And, you know, I went through the whole thing in terms of the different levels of government, different branches of government, and how to effectively lobby individuals that are in power to bring about change. So I think that information is wanted and needed. And I look forward to just working with anyone else who wants that information.
Awesome. Thank you. So there's also a question that has come in regarding the need for a whistleblower statute specifically for officers as they need to know that they will not face retaliation. And so just wanted to put that out there that that is a comment that has come in. So Senator Van Hollen, is there a response that you have to that?
Yes, I think whistleblower protections are absolutely essential to ensuring greater accountability. We need to have a system at the local level, the state level, and the federal level where people can come forward and report wrongdoing without fear that there's somehow going to be reprisals against them by others in an organization. And at the federal level, we've been working to strengthen those laws. As I think everybody knows, I mean, we have President Trump has really attacked a lot of the whistleblower laws and the Inspector General provisions for independent Inspector Generals that we have in federal agencies. But we're going to have to work overtime to make sure that those protections exist, that we have, first of all, strong independent Inspector Generals, and that we make sure we protect whistleblowers. There are some strong federal laws on the books right now to protect whistleblowers, but I think especially in this context that we're talking about here in terms of policing, it's also important. As Councilmember Jones said, to watch the officers just stand by while George Floyd was asphyxiated goes to the heart of this culture that we have to break apart. And we know that there are also often these sort of everyone's silent about wrongdoing within a department. So we need to make sure people feel free to come forward. They should have a duty to come forward, and they should certainly be assured that they're not punished for coming forward.
Thank you so much. So Irma, did you have any other items that you wanted to add?
Well, I just want to add to the get out the vote effort. It is very possible that we are going to have voting by mail, at least in some places. And so we need to take a look at our recent experiences. We've asked our chapters throughout the country to take a look at recent experiences with voting by mail and be in the conversations about what the problems were, how to correct those problems, and to make sure that there's equity in voting across the states. And so, especially, the Voting Rights Act, we have been trying to get that through. One of our members, Terry Sewell, Congresswoman Terry Sewell, has put forth a Voting Rights Act. And so we're also trying to get that passed in Congress. But we want to make sure that some of the inequities that exist with voting doesn't spill over, or they just don't spill over into the voting by mail process. We believe that voting by mail is a safe way to vote, as well as some people are saying that it opens up for fraud and what have you. We don't believe that, but we want to make sure that we resolve some of the problems that exist. And so I know here in the state of Maryland, and Janice is a part of that effort as well, to look at what happened during our recent primary and to make sure that we don't have those problems in November.
Thank you so much. So there's one more topic that I just want to lob out there. Anyone can take this topic. I know there's been a lot of conversation about defunding the police and what that means, what that could look like. There are a few questions that cover that in the chat, but there's also a question about possibly transferring budgetary funds from the state of Maryland Police Department to essential services. So repurposing funding. And so would love to hear and answer just thoughts on that from a budgetary perspective. And then I think that we will wrap up. So Councilman Jones, would you like to, let me unmute you. I'm muting you now. Okay.
Okay, yeah, listen, there's no doubt about it. I certainly understand the various ranges when people say defund the police. There's defund the police, there's abolish the police, there's all sorts of things out there. One thing you cannot deny, when budgets are tight, oftentimes everybody takes a haircut except for the police, because people are often in fear. I can tell you, we just finished cutting our budget. We had to basically cut $120 million, half of it before June 30th, and the other half for the next budget year, next year. And I can tell you that the police did take a haircut, but in general, when you hear people say defund the police, I think that you have to be careful, but at the same time, it's a conversation worth having in terms of all the other resources. For example, the example that I gave where the gentleman was killed on 83, it begs the question, what was the police going to do anyway? Wouldn't it have been, we have a mobile crisis unit, but we only have 3 of them on the street 24 hours a day. It would have been better if we had enough resources to have an additional mobile crisis unit to go and intervene with that gentleman. Maybe he wouldn't be dead today. So it's a conversation worth having. I think it all depends on how it looks at the end of the day in terms of what defund the police mean, right? So that's sort of like clearly there's a conversation to be had in terms of
Conversation, yes.
we
Mhm.
can do to help our communities, whether it be summer jobs, more economic development, you name it.
Mhm. Absolutely. Well, thank you. I want to say thank you to each of our panelists. I didn't know if there were any closing remarks that you all had. Let me unmute Senator Van Hollen, see if he has any closing remarks that he may have for us, and then we'll.
Well, thank you. And again, it's great to be with the AKAs, and just to, piggyback on the answer from Councilmember Jones. I do think that we need to, the police are asked to do a lot of things right now where it's really should not be their primary role. And whether it's addressing critical issues of homelessness or mental health issues, there are a whole range of issues where I think we would all agree that, social workers and people trained in those particular issues would be better equipped to deal with them, and it would not result in the kind of escalation, unnecessary escalation that we so often see. So there's a lot that we have to all work on and do together at the local, state, and federal level. I am so encouraged by the number of young people and the diverse array of young people who are marching and protesting around the country. And I just will end by saying what you have said with respect to voting. Voting it's not everything we need to do to get to change. There's no doubt about that, but it is absolutely essential that people come out and vote. I can tell you in the United States Senate, having a few more like-minded senators, Democratic senators, that makes a huge difference. Who's in the White House makes a huge difference. And so this is why, of course, when this issue bubbled up on social media as to whether or not people should vote, President Obama weighed in heavily and said, of course it's essential that we encourage everybody to get out to vote. And so I want to thank the AKs for all the work you do in terms of social services, but also on advocacy. And we need to make sure that those young people who are marching, and I think have helped precipitate a demand for change, that they also march right into the voting booths. Because as was said, this is not a sprint. This is a marathon. And that means we have to have the votes necessary to pass the legislation to help change the culture, to change these laws, and to change our country for the better. So thank you to the AKs for being, part of that continuing effort.
Absolutely. And thank you everyone for being on our in our meeting this evening, our virtual community conversation. We appreciate you for chiming in, for sharing your questions, and we are going to be in touch. There are so many points of advocacy that we have to be very engaged on. And so thank you again for tuning in. There's much work that we all have to be a part of. So thank you all. All right, this concludes our community conversation. Thank you to all of our panelists and to all of our attendees.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.